In a quiet suburban town, a young black single mother, once raised in luxury, struggles to raise her 3-year-old son. One day she's falsely accused of theft by a white neighbor for wearing a diamond necklace, the only gift she kept from her wealthy parents. Police arrest her in front of her child. But when her parents arrive with a lawyer, the truth is revealed. Her name is cleared, and the family finds their way back to each other in love and forgiveness. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. The sun filtered softly through the golden leaves of early autumn, casting long shadows across the sidewalks of Willowbrook, a quiet suburban town where the fences were white, the lawns freshly trimmed, and secrets buried deep beneath polite smiles. The air was crisp but not quite cold, holding on to the last threads of summer. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved, church bells rang on Sundays, and anything that didn't fit the mold was either whispered about or silently exiled. Keisha stood on the porch of her modest 2-bedroom rental at the edge of the block, Malik's tiny hand wrapped around 2 of her fingers. Her back ached slightly from the long night of rocking her feverish son to sleep, but she straightened her spine the moment she stepped outside. She always did. The world didn't care how tired she was. She adjusted the baby bag over her shoulder and pulled her coat tighter, but the chill that haunted her didn't come from the weather. It came from the eyes she could feel watching her again. Mrs. Karen Whitmore, 2 houses down, peered through her curtain like a ghost trapped in glass, sipping morning tea from her china cup, judgment steeping in every glance, always dressed immaculately, always ready with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Willowbrook royalty. The kind of woman who used those people in casual conversation, never thinking twice. Keisha's gaze dropped briefly to her necklace, instinctively fingering the single piece of her past she had refused to part with, a diamond pendant, small but unmistakably expensive, set in white gold. Her parents had given it to her on her 18th birthday, back when they still believed she'd take over the family foundation, not fall for a boy from a jazz club and return home pregnant and defiant. She'd sold the handbags, the shoes, even the designer crib, but not this, never this. Malik tugged at her coat, mumbling something about his toy car. She smiled down at him, brushing a curl from his forehead, but the smile faded the moment she noticed the curtain across the street shift again. Keisha knew the look in Karen's eyes. It wasn't curiosity, it was calculation. Ever since she moved into this neighborhood, there had been stares. Not just from Karen, but from the mailman who hesitated at her box, the cashier who double-checked her food stamps, the jogger who crossed to the other side of the street when passing her. It wasn't always overt. That's what made it worse. The subtle cruelty of being watched, questioned, doubted, simply for existing in a place she used to belong to by birthright, but now had to earn with every breath. She locked the front door and whispered to Malik, "Ready, baby?" He nodded sleepily. They walked down the steps together. Across the street, Karen's eyes narrowed behind the curtain. "She has no business wearing something like that," she murmured to herself, her gaze fixed on the glint of Keisha's necklace. People like her don't just own things like that, not without a reason. Inside her kitchen, Karen tightened her grip on her cup. The china clinked sharply against the saucer. Keisha, unaware but not entirely unfeeling, caught her reflection in the car window as she buckled Malik into his seat. For a second, she didn't recognize herself. Messy bun, tired eyes, coat too thin for the season. But then the necklace caught the light again, and she remembered she was still somebody. Maybe not to this town, maybe not to her parents, but to her son. That was enough. Or at least she kept telling herself it was. The car started with a wheeze. She had errands to run. Sickness didn't wait for paychecks. Formula and medicine weren't free. And if the stares from the neighborhood came a little sharper today, if the whispers carried more edge, she would ignore them. Because for Keisha, survival wasn't just a matter of food or shelter. It was about holding on to dignity in a world that was waiting for her to trip. But behind one set of curtains, someone had already decided she'd fallen. And the trap was being set. The air had thickened since morning. The soft warmth of autumn had turned damp, pressing against Keisha's skin like warning. She strapped Malik into the back seat, careful not to jostle him too much. His skin was hot against her palm, and his breath came in short, wheezy bursts. His tiny fists clung to the stuffed dog he'd named Bobo, his comfort anchor. Every cough was sharp and dry, pulling at her nerves like fishhooks. She hadn't slept much the night before, and neither had he. She drove slowly, every bump on the road rattling through the old sedan, making her wince. The corner store was only 8 blocks away, but to her it felt like miles when Malik sounded like he was breathing through a straw. Keisha's mind raced: get milk, cough syrup, maybe a warm pack if they had it. All on the last $20 in her wallet. As she passed Karen's house, she felt it before she saw it, that instinctive prickle at the back of her neck. She didn't turn her head. She didn't have to. The curtain moved. Of course it did. Karen was always watching, like some sentry for suburban purity. Keisha kept her chin high, one hand briefly brushing the pendant at her neck, the way she always did when the world made her feel small. But today it wasn't defiance, it was survival. If she didn't hold on to something real, she might disappear altogether. From behind the window, Karen watched with hawk-like intensity. She noted the necklace immediately, the way it sparkled against Keisha's collarbone. Something about it felt wrong. Too extravagant, too clean, not for someone in off-brand sneakers and a jacket fraying at the cuffs. She narrowed her eyes, the gears in her mind already grinding toward suspicion. She'd heard about a break-in last week on the other side of town, and hadn't that new girl at the salon mentioned seeing someone suspicious near the park? She muttered to herself, voice tight with certainty. It doesn't belong to her. No way. Not unless she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Her fingers moved quickly over her phone. Inside the store, Keisha moved with anxious focus. Malik nestled on her hip, his head pressed into her shoulder. She grabbed a half-gallon of milk, a small bottle of cough medicine, and a packet of tissues. As she approached the counter, the young cashier gave her a half-hearted smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. She didn't blame him. Everyone looked at her like that lately, like she was too much and not enough all at once. When she handed over the crumpled bills, she felt the eyes again. A woman at the ATM. A man near the soda fridge. They all saw the necklace. Some just blinked and looked away. Others didn't. Keisha's skin crawled. She adjusted Malik in her arms, tucked the necklace beneath the collar of her coat, and walked out without another word. The sun was lower now, casting longer shadows across the street. The leaves rustled as the wind picked up. Keisha approached her car, unlocked the door, and settled Malik into his seat. His breathing was still labored, and she whispered softly to him, stroking his curls. Almost home, baby. Almost there. She didn't notice the cruiser pull up behind her. 2 officers stepped out, one older, heavy-set, with a stiff jaw and badge that looked polished to perfection. The other younger, but with the same rigid posture, their eyes locked onto her like they already had a verdict written on their clipboard. "Ma'am," the older one barked. "Step away from the vehicle." Keisha froze. "I'm just trying to take my son home. He's sick, look, he's got a fever. We just came from the store. We got a call about a possible theft and suspicious activity, someone matching your description." "My description?" she asked, voice tight. "I live here, I'm just trying to get my son milk." The younger officer's hand moved to his belt, resting casually near his taser. The older one gestured again. "We need you to step away, now." Inside the car, Malik began to cry. The sudden voices, the lights, the tone, they all collided in his feverish mind. "Mama," he whimpered, tears rolling down his cheeks. "Mama." Keisha stepped back, hands raised slightly, voice trembling but clear. "Please, you're scaring him. You don't understand." "Ma'am, I'm not going to tell you again." She didn't run. She didn't yell. She didn't resist. But the moment they moved toward her, grabbing her wrists with unnecessary force, twisting her arms behind her back like she was dangerous, like she was armed, like she was anything other than a desperate mother, something broke in her. Her eyes stayed on Malik, who now screamed, his voice cracking, face pressed to the window. "Mommy," he shrieked. "Mommy, no." People stopped on the sidewalk. Phones came out. Someone whispered, "What did she do?" Another said, "She didn't look like a threat." But no one intervened. No one said stop. Karen stood across the street, arms folded, watching with a tight smile. In her mind she'd done the right thing, called the authorities, protected the neighborhood, maintained the order. That necklace didn't belong on someone like that. It had to be stolen. That was the only explanation that made sense to her. Because the alternative, that a young black woman might still have something beautiful without having taken it, never even crossed her mind. Keisha sat on the curb now, hands cuffed, lips trembling, trying not to cry. Not in front of them. Not in front of Malik. But when she heard him banging on the car window, sobbing her name, her body shook. The weight of it all crashed down. Not just the injustice of this moment, but of every moment leading up to it. Every job she didn't get. Every store clerk who followed her down the aisle. Every time someone clutched their purse a little tighter when she walked by. It was all here now, wrapped around her like the steel of the cuffs digging into her skin. The officer radioed for backup. Another car pulled up. Keisha closed her eyes. She had lived through heartbreak, through exile, through the slow erosion of identity. But nothing, not even her parents' cold silence, hurt as much as hearing her baby cry and not being able to hold him. She had done everything right. She'd played by their rules, worked hard, stayed quiet, endured, and still it wasn't enough. Not here, not for them. Not when her skin already told a story they didn't want to change. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a cold, indifferent rhythm, casting pale shadows across the chipped linoleum floor of the Willowbrook police station. The air was sterile, dry, humming faintly with the static of radios and distant murmurs. The holding room smelled faintly of bleach and old coffee, and Keisha sat there, alone, cuffed to a metal chair, her coat still clinging to her like damp regret. Her eyes were red but dry now. She'd cried all she would allow herself to cry, not because she wasn't breaking, but because she couldn't afford to look broken in this place. Through the two-way glass, officers moved about without urgency. No one met her eyes. No one offered her a tissue. No one asked if Malik was okay. No one had even said his name since they dragged her from the curb. That hurt the most. She kept repeating herself, calmly, clearly, again and again. The necklace is mine. It was a gift from my parents on my 18th birthday. I didn't steal anything. You can check. Please, just check. But they didn't check. Sergeant Hill, the older officer with the rigid jawline and polished badge, had leaned in earlier and said with unsettling certainty, "We've got a reliable complaint, ma'am. A citizen of this town. You don't match the profile of someone who just owns something like that. That's not a crime, but it's something we take seriously." "You mean I don't look rich enough to own my own jewelry?" She'd snapped, before catching herself, before the heat in her voice could be turned into something else, something threatening. He didn't answer, just stared at her with the look of someone who'd already made up his mind. She asked again, voice quieter this time, as if asking softer would change the outcome. "Can I please see my son?" "You'll be allowed contact once we sort this out," he replied, not even glancing up from the form he was filling. "We're just trying to verify the origin of the item. Then we'll know how to proceed." Proceed with what? She wanted to scream, she wanted to flip the damn chair. But she didn't, because Malik needed her to sit still. He needed her to breathe. She looked down at her wrists, faint red lines from the cuffs, her throat ached, her head pounded. But somewhere in the pit of her stomach, that small flame still flickered. She wasn't nobody. She wasn't what they thought. She had a name, a story, a family, even if that family had shut the door on her. A knock at the glass. Officer Daniels entered, young and restless, with a clipboard he barely glanced at. "We need a contact, ma'am. Someone who can verify ownership of the necklace." Keisha looked up. "You mean like someone white enough for you to believe?" He didn't respond, just set the clipboard down. "Name, number." She froze. She had no one in this town. No friends left from college. Her ex, gone long before Malik was born. The shelter workers from the city wouldn't know. She could lie, give them a fake number, but it would just buy time, not the truth. Her hands trembled slightly. Then she exhaled, long and slow. Her mother, they hadn't spoken since the night she'd walked out of that mansion, pregnant, furious, full of fire she thought would last forever. Her mother had begged her not to go. Her father hadn't begged at all. "Choices come with consequences," he'd said, handing her a check she never cashed. Her mother had cried. Keisha had slammed the door. That was 3 years ago. 3 birthdays. 3 winters. 3 letters she wrote but never sent. She stared at the clipboard. Her fingers didn't want to move, but her voice betrayed her resolve. Call Miranda Westmore. Numbers in my phone. Daniels raised an eyebrow. Westmore, like the foundation. Keisha nodded. He hesitated, then walked out. Keisha folded over, resting her head on her cuffed hands. Her stomach twisted. What would her mother say? Would she even come? Would she believe her? Or would she see this as proof that everything she warned her daughter about had come true? Minutes passed. 10, then 20. She imagined Malik in some back room, alone under a blanket that wasn't his, coughing himself to sleep on a bench while strangers filled out forms. Then the buzz of a door unlocking. A new presence entered the room. Keisha looked up, expecting another officer. But it wasn't. It was the police chief, Chief Donovan, an older white man with a sharp suit and the kind of practiced neutrality that came from decades of keeping trouble quiet. He walked in briskly, setting a file on the table. Miss Westmore, he began. Keisha sat up. That's not my name anymore. He ignored the correction. We spoke with your mother. She confirmed the necklace was a gift from your family. She also confirmed your identity. I'll be releasing you shortly. Her lips parted, stunned. That's it? He paused. There was a misunderstanding. The neighbor was acting in good faith. In good faith. Her voice cracked open, low and dangerous. You handcuffed me in front of my child, tore me off the street, locked me up in here for hours, and you're calling it a misunderstanding. The chief's face remained unmoved. There will be an internal review. In the meantime, we'll have someone escort you to your son. Keisha didn't say thank you. She didn't nod. She just stood slowly, the chair scraping behind her. Her hands were still shaking as they unlocked the cuffs. The pain in her wrists had dulled, but the anger inside her had not. She followed the hallway, past desks and uniforms, and radio static. Each step felt unreal, as if she were moving through someone else's nightmare. Then she heard it, soft sobbing, a cough, a small voice calling out in sleep. Malik. He was curled up on a bench, knees tucked to his chest, Bobo clutched in his arms like a shield. Keisha dropped to her knees beside him, wrapping him tight in her arms. I'm here, she whispered, rocking him gently. Mama's here. Behind her, Chief Donovan cleared his throat. Your mother is on her way. Keisha didn't respond. She didn't even turn around. Her eyes were locked on her son. She kissed his forehead and held him tighter. Somewhere, in the back of her mind, she felt it, the tiniest crack in the wall she'd built against her past. The tiniest flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Hope. Not because she trusted the system, not because justice had been done, but because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. And someone who once turned their back on her was finally walking through the door. The night had settled over Willowbrook like a heavy curtain, muffling sound and swallowing the last traces of warmth. Inside the station, the lights still buzzed, officers still shuffled paper, but something had shifted. There was a tension in the air now, electric, unfamiliar. The kind of silence that always comes before thunder. Outside, luxury sedans pulled into the lot one by one, engines humming low like predators in the dark. Sleek, black and impossible to ignore. Headlights sliced through the night, flooding the front of the station with sharp white beams. Then the engines cut. The doors opened. First came Miranda Westmore, elegant, tall, composed, every step precise like she was walking into a boardroom, not a police precinct. Her white wool coat barely moved in the wind. Her heels clicked against the pavement with authority. Behind her came Thomas Westmore, her husband, a man whose name graced hospital wings and university buildings. He wore a charcoal suit, with the collar stiff and sharp, expression unreadable beneath silver-rimmed glasses. He looked like he was arriving to buy the place, not ask questions. They didn't speak to the officer at the desk, they didn't sit, they didn't ask for permission. Miranda walked directly to the duty sergeant and said, voice smooth but cold, I want to see the arrest record and body cam footage of my daughter's detainment, now. The sergeant blinked. Ma'am, now, Thomas said, quiet but firm. the kind of voice that never repeated itself. Chief Donovan came from his office, lips pursed. "Mr. and Mrs. Westmore, this is an unfortunate misunderstanding. You detained my daughter," Miranda cut in. "You handcuffed her in front of her sick child. You held her for hours. Based on what?" A call from a nosy neighbor who couldn't imagine a black woman wearing a necklace that wasn't stolen. Donovan opened his mouth, closed it again. Behind the Westmores, a third figure entered, a woman in a dark gray suit, glasses, sleek ponytail, leather folio in hand. She didn't introduce herself, she didn't need to, she was the lawyer, and she was already recording. Keisha stood near the door to the waiting room, still holding Malik, who now slept against her chest. Her eyes widened as she saw them, her parents, standing there not as ghosts of disappointment but as shields of fire. She didn't move, couldn't. Part of her still didn't believe it was real. The lawyer spoke first, addressing the room like a courtroom. Keisha Westmore was detained without a warrant, without probable cause, based solely on the claim of a private citizen with no evidence and a known pattern of racial bias. We have documented accounts, footage from the scene, timestamps, and medical records of her child's illness. We also have verified authentication of the necklace, gifted on her 18th birthday by Miranda and Thomas Westmore, with photographs, receipts and a notarized appraisal made 6 years ago. She laid a thin folder on the desk. "You want to dispute it? I welcome the effort." Chief Donovan cleared his throat. "This isn't necessary. It's absolutely necessary," Thomas said, stepping forward now, anger barely restrained, "because this town has operated under the illusion that discrimination doesn't exist here. That being polite is the same as being just. Tonight proved otherwise." Miranda turned to Keisha then, her voice softening just slightly. "Are you all right, baby?" Keisha stared at her mother. "You came." "Of course I did," Miranda replied, voice tight. "I should have come a long time ago." Across the room, Karen Whitmore had been ushered in by a patrol officer, her arms crossed, lips twitching in nervous defiance. When she saw Keisha, her mouth opened. "I didn't mean, I wasn't sure, it just looked wrong." "You profiled my daughter," Miranda said without turning toward her. "And you put her child in danger. That's not just ignorance, that's malice." Karen's eyes darted from face to face. "I didn't know who she was. And that's the problem," the lawyer said flatly. Donovan tried once more. "Let's all calm down, there's no need for escalation." "You've already escalated," Thomas said. "By believing a false report without verification. By treating my daughter like a criminal while giving her accuser the benefit of the doubt. We are filing a formal complaint against the neighbor for harassment and defamation," the lawyer added, "and a request for a civil rights investigation into the conduct of this department." The room was silent now. Officers stared at their monitors or studied the floor. Even the radio static seemed to hold its breath. Karen looked pale, shoulders shrinking inward. "This isn't fair." Keisha finally spoke, her voice low, full of something sharp and clean. "Fair would have been walking to the store without a police cruiser following me. Fair would have been holding my son without handcuffs cutting into my wrists. Fair would have been you asking instead of assuming." Her words hung in the air like a verdict. Thomas turned toward her, finally meeting her eyes. "Let's take you and Malik home." Keisha didn't answer right away. For a moment she only looked at them, these people she'd once hated, once missed, once tried so hard to forget. And now they were here. Not with apologies or flowers, but lawyers and evidence and fire. She nodded once. As they walked out together, Malik stirring slightly in her arms, the parking lot lit up with a dozen camera flashes. Someone had tipped the press, reporters were already gathering behind barricades. A familiar voice called out, "Miranda, is it true your daughter was profiled and arrested without cause?" Another shouted, "Is this going to court?" Miranda didn't pause. She placed a hand gently on Keisha's back and guided her through the chaos. Keisha whispered, "This doesn't change what they did." "No," Miranda said. "But it's a start." As the car doors shut and the convoy pulled away, the precinct behind them stood still, cloaked in fluorescent shame. Justice hadn't come quietly. It had arrived with engines roaring and truth laid bare. And for once the world had to watch. The wind moved gently through the hedges surrounding the Westmore estate, carrying the soft rustle of magnolia leaves and the faint laughter of a child across the yard. Late afternoon sunlight spilled over the manicured lawn, bathing everything in a warm amber hue. The backyard, once a place Keisha had run barefoot through as a teenager, now felt like a dream seen through softened glass, both distant and impossibly close. The stone patio, the wrought iron garden furniture, the scent of rosemary and lemon balm from the herb beds, all still there. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Malik was in the grass, squealing with delight as he chased bubbles blown lazily into the air by Thomas, who sat cross-legged on a blanket in slacks and socks, his suit jacket discarded, his tie loosened. Every so often, he clapped gently as Malik caught one, then pretended to fall over in mock amazement. The boy's laugh rang like a chime through the garden, unbothered, unaware. Keisha stood at the edge of the porch, her hand resting on the wooden railing, watching them. Her necklace, still glinting in the afternoon light, hung quietly against her chest, no longer clutched like armor. She wore it differently now. It was no longer proof of where she came from, but evidence of what had endured. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. "I used to sit here," Miranda said, stepping out with 2 mugs of tea. "When you were a baby, you'd crawl right up to that 3rd step and squeal if I didn't pick you up fast enough." Keisha didn't turn. "I don't remember that." "I do." Silence fell between them. Not hostile, just fragile. Miranda set the mugs down, and sat in the chair beside her daughter, folding her hands in her lap the way she always did when trying to hold herself together. "I was wrong," she said, finally. Keisha's eyes didn't leave Malik. "About what?" "About everything," Miranda whispered. "About love being conditional. About thinking that doing things properly was more important than doing them with heart. About who I thought you had to be safe in this world." Her voice cracked, just slightly. "I thought I was protecting you by pushing you, by threatening you, by cutting you off, but all I did was send you into the world without a net and pretend that made you strong." Keisha inhaled, slow and deep. Her eyes began to sting, but she didn't blink it away. "I didn't leave because of the baby," she said. "I left because I couldn't be what you wanted and still be myself. I know, and you never called, not once." Miranda nodded, pain swimming just beneath her composure. "I was ashamed, not of you, of me. Ashamed I'd chosen pride over my daughter. By the time I realized it, I didn't think you'd ever want to hear my voice again." They both watched Malik run through the grass, now trying to climb into Thomas's lap with the innocence of someone who had never known silence or separation. The old man laughed and held him, eyes soft and unguarded. That moment had never existed for Keisha, but she let it exist now for her son. "I never hated you," Keisha said. Her voice was barely audible. "But I needed you to be something you weren't ready to be." Miranda reached over, slowly, and touched Keisha's hand. It didn't tremble. "I'm ready now, if you'll let me." There was no grand music, no tearful embrace, just 2 hands, old and young, clasped between chipped nail polish and diamond rings. A quiet exchange, a final surrender. Keisha looked down at their hands, then over to her son. "I'm not forgiving you because I'm weak," she said. "I'm forgiving you because Malik deserves a family that doesn't flinch when he says his mother's name." Miranda's breath hitched. She nodded, swallowing a sob she didn't want to release just yet. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a while longer, sipping tea, letting the warmth ease its way between them like sunlight through cracks in an old window. No more apologies, no explanations, just presence. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the porch, Thomas stood with Malik on his hip and called out, "You two going to sit there forever, or join us for dinner?" Keisha smiled, softly, sincerely, and stood brushing invisible dust from her jeans. She looked down at the necklace one last time, touched it gently. It no longer felt heavy. As they stepped off the porch together, Miranda wrapped an arm gently around her daughter's shoulder. Keisha didn't pull away. The camera would slowly pan back, revealing the backyard in full, a child playing, a family gathered, the sky streaked in orange and rose. The laughter of generations weaving itself back together. The necklace caught the last bit of sunlight before the scene faded, not as a symbol of wealth, or expectation or power, but of something far rarer, reconciliation, and the quiet, stubborn hope that even the deepest wounds could still find their way home.